Hi, it's Katrina. Number 10. Nan Madol. Nan Madol is one of the oldest archaeological sites in the world and arguably one of the most remote. It was once an ancient city built on top of a coral reef. Located in the Pacific Ocean about 5,500 miles from California, it was built around the year 1200. The island belongs to the Federated States of Micronesia, but hundreds of years ago, Nan Madol was the capital of the mighty Sadalur dynasty. It has been nicknamed the Venice of the Pacific and the eighth wonder of the world. The Sadalurs were said to be the descendants of two mysterious magical brothers who founded a religious community here in the 6th century. The religious aristocracy began to divide into cults over the years. The Sadalur tribe leaders were extremely oppressive, and according to oral history, the native people were often forced to starvation. These people built a great city on top of the coral reef inside of a lagoon off the eastern coast of the island. They created a system of artificial islands, each linked by its own canal. There are nearly 100 artificial islands still in the lagoon today, crafted from a mixture of basalt and coral, which is unlike so many buildings of the ancient world that were built with brick and mud. According to archaeologist Rufino Mauricio, the people of Pompeii needed to move roughly 2,000 tons of basalt rock every year for 400 years consecutively to create Nan Madol, and nobody knows how they did it. The floating city of coral probably held about 25,000 people. It took about 800 years to finish their great city, but by the 18th century, the city was completely abandoned. The people of Nan Madol were invaded by a legendary hero named Iso with the help of Sadalurs who had defected, and the ruling dynasty was deposed. Nan Madol is the only existing ancient city built on top of a coral reef and is now owned by the modern-day Nan Muarki people, who trace their lineage back to that demigod hero. You can go and visit the ancient city of Nan Madol for yourself. Number 9. Ancient Varanasi. Varanasi in India is the raw, beating heart of Hinduism. It's one of the most holy cities in the world and can be found sitting along the Ganges River in North India. While today we know this place as Varanasi, its original name was Banaras, and it's considered the oldest colonized city in the entire world. In fact, Mark Twain described the city as older than history and older than tradition itself. Varanasi is where people come from all over India to die. It's not actually as morbid as it sounds, because in Hinduism, death is just another part of the cycle of life. Hindus believe in a cosmic loop, a never-ending cycle of life and death called samsara. When a person dies, their soul moves on to another body and another place in time. There is also the belief that if one perishes in the holy place of Varanasi, they may break the cycle and achieve nirvana. For this reason, Varanasi is one of the most popular places in the world to shed one's mortal vessel. It's also filled with architectural wonders. There are 88 ghats in the city, which are steps leading down to the Ganges River. These enormous steps are used for a wide range of things, from bathing to religious ceremonies, for getting on tourist boats, and for cremating the dead. Fires burn here non-stop, with about 80 bodies a day being cremated and then dumped in the river from these ancient staircases. That's not all. Varanasi is home to over 300 important monuments. One of them is the Tilted Temple, considered the most photographed temple in the whole city. It's bizarre because it leans roughly 9 degrees to the northwest, with most of the temple submerged underwater, except when the river dries up in the summer. Number 8. Macedonian Tomb. The tomb of Lician and Callicles was built along the ancient road which once connected the towns of Mietsa and Pella, the latter being the old capital of the Macedonian kingdom. The reason the tomb is such an impressive structure is that even after over 2,000 years, the paintings on the walls look as though they were done yesterday. Nowhere else in old Macedonia is a tomb quite as remarkably preserved as this one. The tomb is absolutely enormous. It was originally built for the sons of Aristophanes, Lician and Callicles, around the year 250 BC, and then for about 100 years, the tomb continued to be used as the resting place for both their descendants. It didn't go out of use until the Romans showed up and utterly decimated the Macedonians. The tomb itself contained 2 massive vaulted chambers, along with a typical antechamber and the burial chamber. The door which leads into the burial chamber has the names of the first 2 brothers carved into the stone. That's how we know who it was for. Then inside there are 25 niches in the walls for the deceased. 17 of them once housed ashes and grave goods. The real treasure, though, is the artwork. The tomb was found completely by accident, and when it was found, the researchers tried to keep everything as sealed as possible. The humidity and temperature were maintained, and so the vivid colors have continued to be preserved. The paintings show helmets and weapons, different types of Macedonian shields, and full suits of Macedonian armor, as well as decorative medallions and plants. Number 7. The Cairn of Bretonne. The Cairn of Bretonne is an extremely impressive burial mound in Brittany, France, located on top of a tall hill that overlooks the Bay of Morlaix. All kinds of cairns can be found across Europe, dating back thousands of years. Normally, burial cairns are small. A person would die and be covered with a small pile of stones to protect them, and that was that. But in Brittany, the Cairn of Bretonne is truly gigantic. It was built starting 4,500 BC in the early Neolithic period. To put that into perspective, the pyramids of Giza date roughly back to 2550 BC. According to scientists, the burial cairn is one of the earliest megalithic monuments anywhere on the planet, and also one of the oldest structures ever built by human hands. But in typical human fashion, we nearly destroyed it. Even though it was mapped by French researchers in 1807, it became privately owned and was used as a quarry for paving stones. The ancient monument was nearly completely taken apart before the local community revolted and took back control of the site. What's left today is still a monument of huge proportions. It's built of roughly 14,000 tons of stone and has 11 internal chambers connected like a honeycomb. It is without a doubt the most impressive burial site up until the Egyptians started digging tombs in the Valley of the Kings roughly 2,000 years later. Number 6. The Unfinished Obelisk. There is a structure unlike any other, located in Aswan, Egypt. It's the largest ancient obelisk in Egypt, and it's so big that it was never actually erected. It's appropriately called the Unfinished Obelisk, and it's still lying in the northern quarries where it was originally carved at the order of Queen Hatshepsut before her death in 1458 BC. It was probably meant to be added to the mighty Temple of Karnak, but it never made it out of the quarry. Obelisks are carved in one single block of stone that has to be strong enough to be carved out and then lifted straight into the air. If this obelisk had indeed been put up, it would have reached an astounding height of over 130 feet. That's 30 feet higher than the largest finished obelisk in Egypt, the Lateran obelisk. It weighs about 1,200 tons, and researchers aren't sure why it wasn't completed. The main theory is that it was so big that the structure started to crack, so there was no way the workers would have been able to lift the obelisk straight up without the whole thing crumbling to pieces. It shows the ambition of the ancient Egyptians and has opened a window into their building process. And it shows us that even the amazing advanced Egyptians sometimes made mistakes. And now for number 5. But first, I want to give a big shout out to Seti and Ryan Dorr. Thanks so much for watching and supporting Origins Explained. If you are new here, be sure to subscribe and join the Origins Explained family. Number 5. Aqueduct Technology. You may have heard of the Nazca Lines, the incredible and mysterious geoglyphs found in the desert of Peru's Nazca region. What you may not know is that the lines are named after a very special ancient culture, the Nazca culture. They dominated the desert landscape of Peru's southern coast, and yet they never had any issues growing crops. Somehow, over 1,000 years ago, the ancient Nazca built miles of ingenious underground aqueducts. According to Alberto Martorell, an expert on aqueduct technology, the aqueducts were built between 300 and 500 AD, making them roughly 1,700 years old. And yet, despite their age, the aqueducts could still work today if people actually set their minds to using them. The Nazca used the series of underground structures as tunnels for carrying water throughout the desert, irrigating crops, and turning what was a barren wasteland into a beautiful green oasis. This allowed the culture to flourish and develop in a way they never would have been able to do otherwise. How did ancient aqueducts work? The Nazca designed water collection structures to capture water coming down from the Andes Mountains and from nearby rivers and springs. That water was redirected underground into the aqueduct system, brought deep into the desert, and brought back to the surface to water the crops. It was a brilliant feat of engineering that still survives today, with the water catchers still there in the desert, just waiting for someone to use them. Number 4. Lician rock tombs. In Fethiye, Turkey, there is a group of rock tombs carved into the side of a mountain, and they are a truly marvelous sight to behold. They were built high up into the sky so that it was easier for the angels to reach the dead and bring them to the afterlife. At least this is what the ancient Lycians believed. Dating all the way back to the 4th century, the Lycians believed that every single dead person was carried into the afterlife by some kind of magical creature with wings. Perhaps they were angels or fairies. It's hard to say what the Lycians would have called them, but whatever they were, they came down and scooped the dead out of their graves and brought them to a place where they could rest. To make the job easier on these winged beings, the Lycians started burying their dead high up in the mountains. Over 1,500 years later, many of the tombs are still around. But very few of the tombs are actually worth looking at since most have been vandalized or destroyed. Some of them are monumental, looking like ancient doorways into some kind of dwarven stronghold inside the mountain. Others are a little duller, decayed to nothing but foxholes barely distinguishable on the mountainside, with the interior chambers long since collapsed in on themselves. Number 3. Temple Mount. One of the most important places in all of Israel is the Temple Mount. It's not actually a temple, but a hill located in the old city of Jerusalem that's considered a holy site by the Jews, the Christians, and the Muslims, and it has been for thousands of years. It is said to be the site where Abraham demonstrated his devotion to God by sacrificing his son Isaac. It is also the place where creation began and where the Prophet Muhammad ascended to heaven, so needless to say, it is the cause of much religious tension. These days, Temple Mount is totally flat, a huge plaza surrounded by retaining walls. It is also home to Islamic temples that date back to the 7th century AD. These temples are inside the retaining walls of a much older structure that dates back 2,000 years. The walls were originally built by the great King Herod in the 1st century BC. It was all part of the renovation project to revamp the Second Temple. He expanded and enclosed the holy site with huge limestone blocks going up 100 feet high. Archaeologist Gabby Barkay says that Herod wanted to compete with God and would make things bigger and better whenever he could. In the year 957 BC, King Solomon, the son of the biblical King David, constructed the first temple according to Jewish tradition and scripture. It would have been the biggest, most impressive temple in all of the world, but then it was destroyed by the Babylonians 400 years later. The issue today is that because Temple Mount is considered so holy, nobody has ever been able to dig underneath it. It is under Israeli sovereignty, but also administered by the Muslim Religious Trust. So while people are allowed to visit, Jewish prayer is forbidden at the site. There haven't been many archaeological excavations, and there is no evidence of the first temple. Researchers have found evidence that the second temple was a grand place, full of decorated floor tiles, glass, and ivory artifacts. Number 2. The Unfinished Pyramid. The Pyramid of Bucharest is known as the Unfinished Pyramid, and it can be found as Zayat El Aryan in Egypt. As the name suggests, the pyramid was started, but never finished. There is actually a collection of pyramids and an ancient necropolis. The area has been a restricted military base since the 1960s, so access to the pyramids is limited. No excavations have been allowed since then, and it is hard to learn more. Scholars believe it started being built around 2613 BC during the Old Kingdom period. However, nobody knows who the main pyramid was being built for. Let's look at just how impressive the structure would have been had the project come to its completion. What we know comes from the square base, the only part that was ever actually finished. It measures about 660 by 660 feet. The exact planned size is unknown, and we don't know how grand the whole thing was supposed to be. Zayat El Aryan is surrounded by 5 cemeteries from the First Dynasty all the way to the Roman period. There are burial shafts leading to tombs, and before the area was restricted, researchers found a pink granite sarcophagus and possible chambers. New excavations with modern technology would probably reveal some incredible secrets. Number 1. Baalbek Stone. About a decade ago, the largest man-made block ever was found in Lebanon. Just like the impossible unfinished obelisk in Egypt, Egypt, the block was most likely never used because it was too big to carry. It's called the Baalbek stone because it was uncovered at an ancient limestone quarry in Baalbek, Lebanon. German and Lebanese archaeologists excavated the monumental stone and measured it to be over 64 feet long and weighing 1,650 tons. That is preposterously big, especially considering the rock was carved around the year 27 BC. So, if the Baalbek stone was that big, what in the world could it have possibly been intended for? Researchers believe it was the Romans who carved the stone to be used at their ancient outpost in Baalbek, which they called Heliopolis. They had possibly been hoping to use the gigantic stone in the temple dedicated to the god Jupiter, which is located fairly close to the quarry. If they had been successful in bringing the stone out of the quarry, that would have made it the biggest formed boulder used in a building project in antiquity. And it would have made the Temple of Jupiter and Roman Heliopolis an even more amazing sight than it already is. Thanks for watching! Which site would you like to see for yourself? Or have you already? Let us know in the comments below and be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. See you soon! Bye!